there is a very magical aura that power has. Now, not literally. I don't believe that power is some sort of supernatural thing, although maybe it is. But what I mean to say is that it's really hard to actually understand what power is in itself. It's sort of amorphous. It's almost metaphysical. It doesn't take a concrete physical form in the sense that you can point to something and say, this is power itself. Like you could point to a book and say, this is a book, as a distinct particular book, distinct from every other book and bookness itself. Power doesn't have that. Power only has sort of various actualizations throughout reality. Now, you could even point to institutions, leaders, whatever. You're never going to actually find power as an absolute thing. You can only know power through those things. And for this reason, it's almost like a universal that can only be known through its particulars. But nonetheless, it must exist as a universal for there to be particular instantiations of it. And that's why power almost seems like a form of magic, in a sense. It almost seems sort of mystical. Now, why is power like the way it is? Why does it have this sort of amorphous essence to it? Well, first of all, I think we need to understand the concept of legitimacy. Power is rendered meaningless without legitimacy. If you don't have legitimacy, you don't have power. Power is almost synonymous with legitimacy to a certain extent, although I wouldn't say completely, but it's right up there with it. A very elementary understanding of power is often explicated as power comes from the barrel of a gun, and yes, but also not really. Certainly, if you use force, you're obviously employing power. However, in order to get that force, you need to have legitimacy first. You're not going to have a loyal force of people or access to force, which requires the coordination of resources, unless you have legitimacy to begin with. No one's going to follow a leader who demands he points guns at somebody unless that leader in some sense is recognized as such as a leader and has the ability to make himself recognized as such. So ultimately, you can say the source of power is a gun. Now, someone may say, well, if you gave everybody a gun, then it would level out power, right? It's a very libertarian idea, but that's not really how it works throughout the world. People gravitate towards those who know how to organize others and can account for needs. The world isn't inherently anarchic. Human beings are not atomized, anarchic individuals. We have a desire to cooperate, but more importantly, we have a desire to follow those who have a particular talent at organizing cooperation better than others. You see this with chieftains and tribes and elders in tribes. They are respected for a reason. They have a sort of legitimacy to them. The reason they have legitimacy is because they have a sort of knowledge that others don't, and this gives them sort of power over others. So in order to sort of raise an army or raise a police force or militia of some kind, you're going to need constituents of those groups to actually look toward someone who embodies a element of legitimate power that is followed. We could point to some concrete examples, of course. We had the black shirts in Italy. There were various leaders of various chapters throughout Italy at the time, but they had legitimacy. There was an organizing element. They also had legitimacy because they were able to tap into sentiment that was shared by the masses. Even in more egalitarian groups or tribes, there's still members within those tribes who are looked up to or deferred to in times of stress. And that's a sort of power. Think of a parent. A parent is always often deferred to when the child is struggling with something or has a deep question, because there's a sort of sense of legitimacy. Now, this sense of legitimacy is not just one-sided. It's not just the masses recognizing the leader as such. It's also the leader having to recognize the masses as recognizing him. I mean, that sort of doesn't really need to be said. But ultimately, the reason I want to bring that up is because it's not even just a matter of recognition. It's a matter of, I guess I would say, essential definition. You could use the word ontological as well, of course, and it would apply in this context, I think, because we are making a metaphysical claim. You are not a leader unless you are a leader of somebody, and somebody is not the led unless they are led by somebody. This is Hegel's master-slave dialectic. And also, speaking of Hegel, he talks about how property rights are contingent upon the mutual recognition of someone's property as their property, and almost a limit is contingent upon this. If nobody accepted the fact that your house was your house, then it would essentially not become your house anymore. So that kind of mutual recognition is also necessary. So the reason that applies to power, obviously, in the case of the masses have to recognize the leader as the leader, because if they don't, then the leader is no longer the leader, because you can't lead a mass that is basically not willing to be led, but also not even seeing or recognizing the leader as a leader. It would be like if I were to march into New York City and declare myself mayor, people would look at me and laugh, right? They would say, well, this guy's just crazy. He's probably on drugs. Who does he think he is coming in here saying that he's the mayor of New York City? Because they would refer to the current mayor as the one with legitimate power. So it is a real matter of recognition. I'm not even just talking about like electoral democracy. Take the most tyrannical king, a complete autocrat. I guess you could say Stalin is the most powerful man in history. If nobody recognized Stalin as Stalin, he would no longer be Stalin. He would be something else. If the whole system sort of lost faith in him, everywhere from the bottom to the top, then he would no longer have any legitimacy. They would completely replace him with somebody else. So power does grow from this sort of subconscious agreement or recognition by the mass and the leadership, and they recognize each other and they need each other to exist. So that's sort of the way in which we could understand this sort of magical way in which power expresses itself, along with the fact that it is through this medium and through this recognition where the concrete actualizations of power manifest itself. So what I mean by that is you cannot actualize your legitimate power unless you have a field through which that actualization occurs. You need the institutions to do so, but the institutions need your legitimacy to do so. They exist in a sort of symbiotic matter. So that's why power is very hard to understand for many people, because it's multi-layered. It's not just coming out of the barrel of a gun. It's much more complex than that. And also, if it was just that, and you could just be as tyrannical as you want, what would happen is large amounts of discontent would begin to arise in the mass, and then another leader, either from within that territory or from outside of that territory, would then use that sentiment to then delegitimize the person ruling over that mass that had basically alienated them too much. So all in all, you cannot alienate those who you are leading, or else you will lose legitimacy.